Hello and welcome. It is episode number 30, the big 30 of the Hilarious Humanitarians Podcast. Yep. I am Frances Echeverria, licensed marriage and family therapist.
And I am Deanna Silverman, licensed clinical social worker. Hi, guys. We're back.
We are back. And as we're jumping into it, first of all, May is National Mental Health Awareness Month. So you are doing something good, we think, by listening to this podcast. But please, if you can, get out there and get more information about the cause and spreading the word about mental health and awareness so that there isn't, such a stigma that's attached to it. Now, as we are getting into things today, I want to let you know that we're going to cover friendships in the workplace and also some listener questions that have come in specifically about managing relationships in the workplace, and also if you've got some difficult placements, and we'll get into that. But before we get absolutely started on things today, I want to ask you to please rate and subscribe to this podcast. Please let all of your friends know about it as well. And also know that our podcast is for informational purposes only. It does not constitute medical advice and is not a substitute for professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. And we do say to ask for the advice or seek help from a physician, mental health professional, or other qualified health provider with any questions you have regarding a condition. But hopefully this will start to send you in at least a direction, hopefully a right one. So as we're getting started today, we have a couple of articles that we want to jump into regarding friends in the workplace. Before we do that, Deanna, do you make friends with the people you work with?
I have made some really, really, really fantastic friends. In fact, one of my friends that I met in the workplace introduced me to my husband, and I just booked my room to go to a bachelorette party of a past coworker who's now my very, very good friend. So yeah, I have. And then I've also had really bad fallouts at work because this is all a work in progress. And unfortunately, sometimes things just don't work out. Reason why we're doing this topic is because this is something that we get a lot. I'll get DMs. I don't know about you, Frances. I'll get messages all the time. We also get a lot of emails from people asking us to talk more about workplace drama, workplace boundaries, friendships, frenemies. Work is that place that most of us have to go, and we spend a lot of hours there in comparison to being at home. So this is a good topic, I think, to touch on and explore.
Well, as we mentioned, we're going to get into that and then also some specifics from listeners. But for me, some of my most long-standing, truest friendships have been developed at work. And it's been interesting too, because when I say work, I will also expand that to say that I also do radio aside from doing the mental health stuff. And some of my best friends started out as listeners, which is a weird place to go down because it just creates some interesting kind of dynamics, or it can, and sometimes that make for terrible outcomes.
Yeah, now that you're saying that, I was thinking there are people that follow me on Instagram who have been following me from the start. Actually, before I started the Hilarious Humanitarian brand, I was doing face painting online, and I'm not trained or anything. I looked it up on YouTube, and I just wanted an outlet, a creative outlet. And so I was posting what I would come up with. And somebody recently posted or sent me a message of I have been following you since you were doing the face painting. I can definitely see myself becoming friends with some of my followers,
hello.
Online. Well, yeah. Look at us. We have a podcast show. I meet people. We had Amy from Canada fly in.
And you can meet amazing people through work and through, in this particular case, if we talk about followers and listeners, but there are pros and cons because sometimes it can go bad. It can go so bad. So we want to start with an article that we're talking about today that's from liveabout.com, and it breaks it down. The pros and cons of becoming friends with coworkers. So to go down the list here, we're going to just highlight some of the pros and cons. Now, some things to keep in mind that it brings up is the stuff that you do not talk about. And as we're going down this list of things not to talk about with your coworkers. It would be interesting to see if either you or I, or you listening, if you can, admit to
I've made some mistakes. I'm just going to go out there. Yeah.
Well, you and me both. Here we go. Things to keep to yourself include anything related to money, including salary and financial history. Man, that can mess people up.
Yeah. Have I done? I don't think I've done that one.
I've always been kind of on the very guarded side for that, but I have seen where people find out differences in pay. And sometimes it's done innocently, like so-and-so comes up to the other person and says, I'm going to ask for a raise. And that other person knows that person has terrible work ethic, but then they are advocating for themselves. So they end up with it and it just gets nasty. I've seen that.
Yeah. I've actually purposely not asked my fellow social workers how much they make. In my head, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to ask them for fear that they're actually going to tell me. Mm-hmm. And for fear that they're going to tell me some number that is way different from what I'm getting paid. And then I'm going to have one hell of an emotional breakdown.
Right.
So I actually protect myself from not asking those questions. And I guess I've just been lucky enough to have no one ask me the same.
And that's where you can say no. We talked about that in a previous podcast about having boundaries. And this is where we have to be very real that sometimes curiosity can get the best of us. And once you know something, you can't unknow it. So do you really want to know?
One time I worked at a hospital that it was not, by the way, the hospital that I previously worked at most recently. I feel like I need to say that for some reason. But I worked at this hospital that had the worst administration, just the worst management, just the worst. And they every year would be like, we don't have any money. And so during the holidays, they used to do bonuses that weren't even that much. And we busted our ass. Like we would do these reports where like, come to find out we were saving them like literally millions of dollars. And they were nonprofit. So your tax returns are public information. And so I dug a little deeper and then I found out how much they were giving themselves bonuses, like administration
no.
for like the holidays. And I was like, I kind of wish I didn't do that because I already didn't like you.
Now you know.
Now I really don't like you.
Now I know you're a scumbag. But notice that you didn't work there anymore.
Yeah. And I mean, I left peacefully and professionally. I ended up moving but I already didn't like the way they were functioning and that just made it worse. But it also, like, I felt justified in my dislike. Because it wasn't something that I was making up in my head. I was like, oh, that's neat.
Yeah.
You guys really? Okay.
Here we go. Well, another one it says not to talk about is your sexual history. That's not something that you really want to get around the office.
And no, don't do that. And if you're somebody who spreads lies about people's sexual history.
We don't want you to listen, so go away.
Yeah, please kick rocks.
Look, we'll be inclusive to an extent, but if your lot in life is to go be a complete asshole, you're not welcome here.
Somebody did that to me.
Are you serious?
Yes. At the same place that I'm talking about. And that place was hell on earth. But you know what? Speaking of being in hell at work, this goes along with this topic. I truly feel that no matter where I go now, it can't get any worse. I have suffered and lived to tell the tale. Like, I don't really talk about it that often, but I was the bigger person. I stayed professional. I didn't do anything that was out of character. I was always responsible with my job duties. I walked away still with many, many friends from that job. It's just there were really toxic management and administration people there. And one of them were spreading rumors, like literally a manager. And so I don't know. I feel like empowered by the fact that like I walked away from it and I'm better for it. and they're going to go on and live their miserable life. And once I left, they just found somebody different to torture.
Right. And that's sad.
Yeah.
Okay, so the other thing it talks about is to not talk about physical illnesses or illnesses you might be dealing with, because sometimes it's just too much private information. Let's see what's going down this list of things that if you're going to have friendships at work, to kind of keep to yourself with those work-only friendships. Let's see here. Illness or health concerns. Also, details of your job performance reports and reviews. This goes right along with salary and financial history. And lastly, personal issues that might cause problems for work at you. And we'll talk about this because we'll get into the pros and cons. So I think at some point we've probably all broken those rules. That's probably clearly happened.
We're human. It happens.
We are. And we're not here to judge anybody, but it's also something to keep close to your chest, if you will, in terms of giving up some of this information, because you don't really know.
And you don't know who, sometimes we just don't know. I feel like the job, the place that we go to work, it breeds insecurities. I feel like it takes a good person and can make them really, really good, and it takes a odd person, it can make them odder. And so you don't really know people until enough time has passed. Right. And even then you don't really know. So to give away such personal information, you just don't know how they're going to use it.
Yes. Or how they might change in just their simple views of you. Maybe it's not a good idea to talk politics, religion, and certain views on social issues, because it just could complicate things, and that's not what you're looking for. But some reasons to find friends amongst your coworkers include that work becomes more enjoyable. You feel appreciated and cared about. You actually like going to work. Imagine that. Especially, we spend more time at work often than we do with our families. So if you're going to have to put in the time, that's important. Also, coworkers can have your back more than usual because they know you on a personal level, and that can be important when times are kind of rough at work.
What's interesting is an article that I was reading was saying how people that have positive relationships and make friendships at work, they're just more successful all around. But when they look at Americans specifically, it was a very tiny percentage of people actually involve themselves in healthy friendships. And I found that to be really interesting. I don't know. I just feel like American culture is so hustle and bustle, and everybody is that dog eat dog. Everybody's climbing the ladder and trying to be the best and super competitive. And so even though a lot of us are just trying to get by and make sure that a paycheck is going to be there and do our jobs and go home to our families, I don't know. I just think that the dynamics get so funky that people get afraid to open up and make those friendships. Even though the science behind it says we would actually be a lot happier if we did those things and we were open to the friendships.
I feel like it's all or nothing in a lot of ways. There are those with zero boundaries, and then those with too rigid of boundaries. And I found myself in that way too. And also, you're right. A lot of us work in situations where there's a constant threat of downsizing, or sometimes there are people who, rather than take responsibility for their actions, will try and find a scapegoat. And if you've seen that happen, maybe it hasn't happened to you specifically, but you've seen it happen to other people, you get really, really, you're on the defensive in that way. But the good thing about sometimes having coworkers who have your back is that there's less of a chance for misunderstanding. So for instance, if we've had my co-host from my radio show on our podcast, Drew, and I can know Drew's having a bad day and just know his demeanor and know that has nothing to do with our interaction because we've been friends for so long. Or if I'm kind of freaking out about something, he doesn't take that personally because we've been friends. So he knows there's some room for ambiguity. Whereas if I've just met somebody and they're really snippy or short or frazzled, it's easy to kind of interpret that wrong. So it gives you some leeway. Also, a friendlier work environment promotes creativity. Now, this is true whether your job is directly related to creative pursuits or you just have more creativity and problem solving because you feel more comfortable being yourself, and it allows you to think outside the box with your coworkers.
Yeah, because we're not thinking we're being hunted.
Yeah.
We're not all stressed out and scared and freaked out, you know?
Yeah. Lastly, having a friend at work gives you a safe person to vent to for your frustrations, which means you can release your anger and rebound more quickly when setbacks occur. Now, this is dangerous territory, though, because it can easily get into a bitch fest, which is toxic. And we'll talk about that. You know what I always find is funny is people go to work and they work together, and then they go sometimes and hang out and they just complain about work. Mm-hmm. When I go out with people, I don't want to talk about work, but oftentimes that's all they have in common.
Right.
So some cons, according to this article from Live About.
There's a difference between like sitting and talking about just temporarily like letting off steam, mm-hmm. and being constructive in some way. Like maybe somebody's venting and then they can offer a suggestion about like, okay, well, next time this happens, or not even offer a suggestion, just validate. Yeah, that was wrong. Or, you know, I can hear what you're saying.
Some validation.
Feel that way. But what I don't like is when I see or hear people getting together to like gossip about
that's where
a particular person, you know, that has really nothing to do with the job. They're bringing in a lot of personal stuff, or like who they're dating or who they're sleeping with, and that's nasty to me. I don't respect that. I don't like that.
The way that I've been guilty of being caught up in that before. And I often find like when I go back to old friendships, especially if you try and maintain friendships with people you used to work with, but you don't work there anymore, sometimes those relationships naturally fizzle out. But what I try and tell myself is if they're talking about that person to me, then they're talking about me to someone else.
Yeah.
It's an absolute guarantee. And do I really want to be involved in that?
I don't even like when people talk about celebrities. Isn't that weird? But I remember I worked in the ER and I was sitting there and they started talking about, it was a celebrity that died, and there was speculation of like a drug overdose, and they started just chiming in with their opinions and just talking about their life, and it just like creeped me out. And I'm probably alienating myself because I know most people we tend to talk about celebrities, but I just in that moment I felt really bizarre. Like if a celebrity has died, it's a human being, and so celebrity or not, just I don't know. It just felt so inappropriate and unprofessional in the work. But we're working in the ER, for God's sakes. Like people are dying all around us sometimes.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, how about you not make assumptions or like allegations about somebody that you don't even know?
That leads to the first reason to keep your distance in terms of friendships. And that's that work can become an unprofessional environment where too much chit chat and not enough focus on the job can get you and your friends in trouble.
Yeah.
Too much distraction. Also, sometimes having a friend in the office stand up for you can garner resentment from others, where they can feel like there's preferential treatment that you don't deserve.
I've experienced that.
What was the situation?
Well, back to that old place I worked at. I started off with somebody who I thought was my friend, and then I started to see odd behaviors and undermining behaviors, and her aligning with the administration. And we would be like in meetings where we're talking about things that affect us all, specifically like safety. And these are things that she would talk to me about and tell me like, yeah, I agree with you. I think that this needs to be changed. But then when we would be sitting in front of management and they would say like, does anyone have any suggestions or any ideas? I would bring it up, naturally thinking that she would also chime in to give her support, to be like, yeah, I also feel this way. And just, it'd be crickets.
Like,
yeah. You know, and I just, over time, I saw what she was doing, and she was just trying to climb up the ladder and like it just felt really icky.
Well, and that actually lends in, it's kind of a cascade effect. So you have sometimes that there's this resentment if there's preferential treatment, which then getting too close to someone at work can mean that they just know a little too much about you. And then where does that information go? If, for instance, it turns out that you become the victim of sabotage or backstabbing. Because as we mentioned, there is a lot of that dog eat dog world in American workplace culture, which unfortunately sometimes nice people get screwed over. So this particular article gives the pros and cons, and you proceed with caution and with basically kind of just being realistic about your expectations and what you're looking for out of those friendships. So now that we've covered that topic, we have another one. And Deanna, you're going to go over this one from fastcompany.com, where it talks about stop trying to be friends with all of your coworkers and do this instead. So this is going from that, the cons kind of outweigh the pros of having friendships, but you do want to be able to have positive interactions with your coworkers.
Yeah. So like you had just mentioned about it feeling at times like all or nothing. This article, I feel like, takes the approach of like, this is how you can kind of meet in the middle instead of being just like BFFs with everybody or completely isolated and not talking to a soul. This gives some really helpful suggestions and like how you can behave in the workplace while being approachable and friendly, but also still commanding respect and being a professional. So the first thing that it talks about is like express gratitude. So it says, given the insane quantity of emails many people receive, you shouldn't feel obligated to answer every message, even with a simple thanks. It's just not necessary and might be unintentionally annoying. But if your coworker has clearly put in like an extra work on a project or done something well, taking a few seconds to acknowledge their effort can go a long way. It's as simple as dashing off a quick email or, message or whatever to say like a sincere compliment. So I thought that was interesting, and I feel like I can take something out of that because I'm one of those people that want others to feel that I'm acknowledging their presence. Mm-hmm. I even do that on Instagram, which I've had to take a step back from because it's just eating up way too much time, where like I will try to respond to everybody that messages me, and then I just realize like it's just not.
You just can't.
You just can't. But if somebody writes me a really like in-depth, thorough message and I read through it and I realize this, I can take 10 seconds out of my day to write them back. Mm-hmm. I think that is important to do. I'm talking about Instagram here, but it absolutely applies to work. And I think people should do that. So no need to be like writing thanks to every single email that comes in. Right? But to appropriately express gratitude to people who have made like an extra effort, I think, right?
Yeah. And even if it's just doing normal, you can throw out a thank you here and there, even if it is, I'm thinking specifically of the front office staff that I work with at the doctor's office where I see clients. I appreciate when they let me know, they pass along info or they bring a chart in or something to that nature. If they ask if I want something because they're going to go run an errand, that kind of thing, you can be friendly and nice and engaging and have a positive experience without making it a full outside friendship.
Right.
So I think that's incredibly, incredibly useful. Okay, so we've covered express gratitude. That can be useful in the workplace. What do you have next of these 5 things we should be doing?
All right, so 2, make time to meet. I like this one. This one, basically, the gist of it says, if, let's say you're a manager and you're telling your employee that you guys are going to meet to do like a performance evaluation on Tuesday at 3:00. Something comes up and you have to reschedule. One time it happens, okay. But if you continually pass someone off and continue to reschedule them, that is not cool. It's just not cool because rescheduling on such short notice over and over and over again basically just tells the other person you're not that important. or I'm really bad at time management. Either way, like it just sucks. And then what ends up happening is if in the future you need something from them, it could be employee to employee. It doesn't necessarily have to be in management. But if you're telling somebody that we're going to meet one-on-one to discuss a project or whatever, then you should make that a priority and follow through. Like I said, sometimes things come up and you have to reschedule it. But if you continue to do this and show that it's a habit, that you're just pushing it off and making that person kind of second choice or whatever, then it's just not going to bode well for the relationship, and it's going to breed some resentment naturally.
And so that's why sometimes it can be real easy to push those things off, but we really need to think about it. How would we feel if somebody was doing that to us? Because where you spend your time is an indicator of where importance is. So moving past make time to meet, proactively offer support is also a useful one, and not as hard as you would think.
Yeah, this one just talks about offering to help, let's say a fellow coworker. Maybe it's the start of a project and you're noticing that somebody is overwhelmed or something's going on. Just being able to anticipate changes in the dynamic or changes in the progression of starting a project instead of being reactive, right? We talk about things happen, then we react to them. We're talking about being proactive, where you can start to see changes in people's behaviors. Maybe they look overwhelmed, and then you can step in and just be supportive. We're not saying step in and be like, hey, let me do your work for you so you can chill out and relax and have a mental health day. But we're saying that there's importance to stepping in and showing your support and it not being judgmental. Don't make people feel bad about maybe they're just having a tough time, and you're going to be a team player and step in and show them like, hey, I'm here for you. Let's brainstorm. Let's work through this together.
And it can be as simple as sending an email. It can also be as simple as sending a text message if you're on that, or just stopping by and you can read. I'd like to think that anybody who's listening to our podcast knows how to read body language. And if you're walking past someone and you can see they're really stressed out and you just kind of go like, hey, if you need anything? I say this often. Sometimes my coworkers know exactly when I need a caffeine fix because they can tell I'm tired and like ragged, and they're going to go run and get, a coffee. That means so much to me. Even if I don't want it, just that they're thinking of it.
Right.
And it goes a long way to create a positive workplace environment where you're not even having to kind of go into that, are we friends? Are we not friends?
Right.
One thing that I love about the place I work is that we remember birthdays. And that this article talks about how milestones are important.
Yeah, it's actually the fourth thing on the list. So it talks about remembering milestones being really important. That can be a work anniversary, birthdays. We are not saying if you work in a company that has 100 employees to buy 100 birthday cards and 100 gifts or anything like that. I mean, if you do, wow, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But, if you share an office with people, if you you literally share a 10 by 10 room with 3 people, then I think that it wouldn't be unreasonable to check, like if they mention their birthday, just jot it down in your phone, on a calendar, somewhere. These chances are if you're sharing that close of a space with somebody, then things most likely are going to feel personal on some level, and so to acknowledge a birthday is not that difficult. And I think it makes people feel really cared for.
One of the things that I'm a huge fan of is I buy massive amounts of like pretty generic cards.
Mm-hmm.
And even this talks about milestones specifically, but I make it a point for birthdays. I think that's great. But also around Christmas, doing something like that in terms of if you're going to make Christmas cards anyways, and you work in a work environment where it's not going to be too weird to hand those out, if that's something that just feels connected and involved.
Mm-hmm. You don't have to spend a ton of money.
Not at all. Or bringing, if you've got, extras of leftovers, or saying, there's something in the kitchen, just those things. This talks specifically about milestones, but I think just creating that feeling of being a part of something can go a long ways to creating a workplace environment that feels welcoming without getting into the friends zone, good, bad, or otherwise.
So we're talking about also, I do want to point out, because a lot of the messages were about, I do all these nice things, but I've got some really shitty people that I work with that make everyone feel bad or make me feel bad. And so I just want to say that we are going to get there, or maybe we can even just talk about it right now. But I just want people to know this is because we can't control other people's behaviors and actions. We can only control ourselves and what we put out into the world and the universe and how we make other people feel. Most of the time, it's just one or two bad apples that we're trying to not ruin the whole bunch, And I can speak from experience that sometimes it just doesn't pan out the way you want it to. Sometimes you can't ignore that one bad apple. And sometimes you're in a workplace that is just awful and there's just way too many bad seeds, And I'm also not trying to minimize how difficult it can be to find another job, but I also advocate for people, like, if you can, and you're at a job that is just, you don't see any end in sight and it's really affecting your mental health and you're miserable, then we always say this on this show, like, the best time to find a new job is when you already have one, and just start looking, putting the feelers out there and seeing what's out there, because sometimes you do have to just walk away. There's some companies and there's some places that we work at where it was toxic before you got there, and it's going to be toxic long before you leave. And so we just have to evaluate what we're willing to put up with and try our best to move on from it and learn something from it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We'll get into some of dealing with the difficult situations in just a minute, but we do want to wrap up with this last thing. It's 5 things to do instead of making friends at work. And just to recap, so far, they are express gratitude, make time to meet, also proactively offer support. This last one that we just covered was remember milestones. And lastly, just be present. Just be there and, I don't know, have some eye contact, call them by their name.
Please don't look at your phone when people are talking to you. Unless somebody's text messaging you, letting you know that you just won the lottery, please look up. I've worked with a few people that just, I could see that they were on Instagram. I understand if you're text messaging your nanny or something's happening. I get that. Everyone for the most part is reasonable, and we understand that life is still happening while we're at work. But if we're having a conversation and you're sitting there browsing your phone or playing Candy Crush or whatever the hell you're doing, it just is rude. It's so uncomfortable.
And that's not saying to drop everything and what you're doing, because maybe there's a time when you can't, but instead of sneering and being like, ugh, maybe just clearly, and we talked about this in earlier podcasts, clearly communicate, right now it's not a really good time. I'll come find you when I have a minute. Or I'm not trying to be rude, but I've got to finish this up. But basically to just be present and recognize that human beings are taking up space in your area, and maybe that should require some sort of acknowledgement.
Here's a good one too. If you're in a hurry, but you are one of those people that you want to build these relationships, and you see somebody that you're like, I cannot ignore this person. You're passing them in the hallway, but they're a bit of a chitter chat. They'll talk and talk and talk and talk. I just use the little white lie of, so sorry, I have a meeting in 5 minutes. I gotta go. They don't need to know what the meeting is. The meeting probably doesn't even exist, but I'm just giving them a reason why I gotta skedaddle. And I can't sit here and talk to you about Lord knows what for 35 minutes. I got to get home. But I also don't want to ignore you, because I like you enough where I do want to say hi and see how your day is going. So I always use that, man. I use that for just about everything.
I've got something really important I got to get to.
Yeah.
All right. So we've covered those things about friends and whether or not you making friends in the workplace, but we did get a few specific questions. And Deanna, you were going to share those as we're kind of covering everything about friendships in the workplace and some variations thereof.
Yeah, well, I wanted to kind of fit this one into this topic. It's not about work per se, but I always get people messaging us asking about what our experience was like in graduate school and like our internships. And I get people that ask, what do I do if I'm in a bad internship? What was your experience like gearing up? Even before we went to grad school, like what made us want to go to grad school, what jobs we wanted to get into. So I just kind of wanted to add that into this episode, I think, because obviously if you're talking about internships in grad school, then what we're talking about is a future employment.
Or unpaid workplace is basically what you're talking about too.
Yeah.
So did you have difficult placements?
I got relatively lucky. I feel like the difficult places I've worked was after grad school. I don't feel like grad school in some ways prepared me for the shit shows that I was about to walk in.
Probably because those places where the internships were, they were being overseen by people who knew that there was some accountability. Really quick, I guess I just assumed everybody knows what we're talking about. Deanna is a licensed clinical social worker. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. That means that we both have our master's degrees in our separate areas. And then part of graduating is you have to complete so many hours. After that, though, people can go on to do nothing with their master's or they accumulate hours to work towards licensure, or they find themselves in this place where they're just working as trainees. They're also called associates, I think, and interns is the other thing when you're not licensed. And so you're working in the field, but you're not able to test for licensure until, like, for instance, an LMFT is 3,000 hours. Then you have to pass the test. And then, so that's what we're kind of talking about. But you can get these paid internships. You're just working under someone's license. So I just wanted to clarify that. But so you're saying you had good placements. I too, I had good placements. I did work for a county. Counties were a great place to work to be able to get supervision from licensed people. But you found out and the county I worked for paid really nicely, but I was commuting.
That was after grad school though, right?
It was after, but I was technically an intern. And I mean, I'll be totally honest, working in a county government setting is not for me. It's just not. I mean, I did my 3 years. It's not. But I know that works for some people. That's why I work 3 jobs, is so that I can piece together an existence that works where I don't have to be somewhere 40 hours a week.
Right. What did you do an internship while you were in grad school?
I did. I worked at an inpatient drug rehabilitation center for women who were trying to get their kids back through CPS. That was the vast majority. And I will say this, I had a great experience having not been exposed to those circumstances. It was very eye-opening. I was able to cultivate a lot of compassion and empathy for people that I did not have exposure to. But I did work, and I have worked with people who I think are absolutely doing damage. And that's an interesting situation, especially when you're a student, because you're watching and everybody's learning. But, you know, if there's a red flag, I will say this, this is one area where I guess I was kind of proud. When I had an issue with it, I brought it up, because it's our jobs not to tattle, but to hold one another accountable, especially if you're at a placement, so that you don't get in trouble, to be perfectly honest. I think in work or as a student or new to being in the field, and this could be any field, I think sometimes we question ourselves on whether we should say something because we're the new ones. But I guess the takeaway I would say from some of my experiences is that if all the red flags are there, sometimes you need to say something because you might be the one seeing it with a fresh set of eyes. So it can be an interesting situation. But overall, I didn't have any terrible experiences. And I distanced, and I'll be perfectly honest, I distanced myself from people who I thought I could find myself in situations with that I did not want to have to explain to upper management.
Right. In grad school, my first year internship was being a case manager. For the most part, it was case management, but I did do some one-on-one psychotherapy with older adults. And by older adults, I mean 65 and older, but like all my clients were, I'm not kidding, like 80 years old. And my oldest client was like 99 years old. And the case management piece, it was really interesting, was for Holocaust survivors in Long Beach. Oh my
goodness.
So that was my first year of grad school. And then my second year, I was at a hospital in palliative care and oncology. So pretty much working with patients going through cancer treatment. And palliative care, it geared me up because my first job out of grad school was hospice, because I really wanted to get into medical social work. And I kept hearing everyone talk about how if you don't have any experience, not just internship, but employment in a hospital, it's going to be really impossible to get a job as a social worker. So that's kind of like if I have any recommendations or suggestions for anybody that wants to get into medical social work, I would say work in hospice, because it's a good transition. And typically from what I've seen, it's what the hospitals want to see on your resume, is some element of like home care, and hospice is a really good one. But the person that wrote to me was talking about how her internship was not great. It wasn't her first pick, second pick, third pick. She very much felt like they really didn't even know what to do with her. And I actually talked to her a little bit through DM on Instagram, and I was just, talking to her about how sometimes it's unfortunate because we've got all these expectations, especially in graduate school, especially when we're like paying top dollar for our education. And it can be extremely disappointing and really upsetting, actually, when we're placed in an internship that just doesn't even feel like it aligns with anything that we want to do. But my whole thing is no experience is wasted. No experience is wasted, exactly. The fact that you got the opportunity to be in a certain setting is so valuable, because first of all, you can put that on your resume regardless if you liked it or not. But B, you don't have to waste your time in the future, because you already know, like, I've already worked with that population. I've already worked in that setting. It's not for me. And so I remember what it was like in grad school and feeling like everything was so like weighed so heavily on the internships. But it's great experience, but it's definitely not the end of the road, for sure. It's just the tip of the iceberg. So just find the value in whatever you are doing while you are working towards completion of a graduate program. All of it is valuable, I promise.
I would say you can even take that to a job, even if you work outside of mental health. Sometimes you've got to put in the time to be able to put yourself in the best situation for advancement or satisfaction. Mm-hmm. I mentioned that I had worked out of town working for a county while I got my hours and could then test. I came back to Fresno, which was, I wanted to work in town, at a place where all I needed was a master's degree. And actually I had to petition to get the job because they wanted a master's in social work and mine was in counseling. So it was a strategic move though. And I could have been bitter and angry about it, or I learned an absolute incredible amount of something that I never thought I was going to work in foster and adoption. Mm-hmm. And now that has carried over into ways that are incredibly useful. So it's never wasted time if you can find a lesson in it.
Yeah, I agree.
So as we're wrapping up, we do invite you to, if you have questions about things and we'd like to, pop them in here on our episodes where we can find a fit for them, you are welcome to get in touch with us. We do have that information up wherever you find our podcasting stuff. Before we wrap things up, want to talk really quickly about some listener shout outs. I got this message. It was after we did the one podcast, Deanna, where my friend Cynthia filled in because you had to do some self-care and take some time off to feel better. Mm-hmm. This one says, I don't even know what to write to you guys except thank you. Today's podcast helped me find acceptance of my own anxieties and even open my eyes to what my 17-year-old daughter has been displaying for years. It's nice to have friends like you out there, and we do feel like friends, so that we can see that normal is never actually normal. Thank you from the deepest place in my soul. You've made my day. And I let Cynthia know about that, and she was floored, by the way. And I love, one of the things I love is normal is just a setting on a washing machine.
Right? What's normal anyway?
Yeah.
What is normal anyway? For real.
As we're wrapping up, it is halfway through the month of May. We're a little over halfway through, and it is Mental Health Awareness Month. And one thing we want to encourage you to do is to please, a couple things, a little self-serving, rate and subscribe to this podcast, because I feel like we do a lot to improve mental health through our work here, and it's free. The other thing is, I was having a conversation with an old coworker, one of these friends you want to keep around, and the importance of trying something new to build resiliency. So, Deanna, I know things have been kind of crazy in your household. Do you have anything kind of on the horizon that you would like to try that's new and different? And it doesn't have to be big, but this idea of building resiliency through challenging ourselves and pushing past a comfort zone.
I am starting a new diet tomorrow.
Oh, what's the new diet?
Well, no, it's not a diet. It's a lifestyle.
It's a lifestyle. Okay. That's true. It's true.
I'm going to start the keto diet. I got inspired by being on Jersey Shore. No, for real. My friend Marianne, she lost 70 pounds and she looks incredible and her energy is back and whatever. I'm going to try it. I need to get my ass in gear. And I think that once I get my energy back and cut the sugars out, I was talking about going to the gym and I never did it. And I really just need to put myself out there and try new things. And so I was thinking, okay, I'm going to do this diet and I'm really going to stick with it. And I'm saying this on our podcast because now people are going to hold me accountable. They're going to want to know how the lifestyle is going.
So now,
and so go ahead.
I was going back and forth on whether or not I don't believe in jinxing things, but I also don't want to have to explain myself when something falls flat on its face. So you're talking about the accountability of making some positive lifestyle choices. And I've been trying this dating thing.
Yes.
And I've been trying this thing where every time I catch myself wanting to censor myself, because not to get ahead of myself, but I've met somebody and he's nice and we're just kind of getting to know one another. But I find that I naturally try and censor myself on a regular basis. So instead, every time I get uncomfortable where I go, "Ooh, you shouldn't say that," I just blurt it out anyway.
How's it going for you?
It's going really well. It's something as silly as we were having, man, you want to just make me all weak in the knees. Start talking to me about social injustice.
Oh my God, I love you.
And emotional maturity. And I'm just, keep talking. You are so sexy. But anyway, a conversation was coming up. It was something about entitlement in today's world. And he went on one direction and I agreed with him, but I also disagreed. And I said something, and that was huge because I'm very opinionated in a lot of ways, but I get into this weird place when I'm dating where I'm like, if I say this, they might not like me anymore. And I definitely don't want to do that. So the good news is he's either a glutton for punishment or he likes what he's hearing because he hasn't disappeared or ghosted.
He hasn't run. Yeah. I tried that out with my husband. I was like, no more censoring. And I'm just going to say what I have to say and you're going to like it or you're not. And now we're married. And he puts up.
Oh, yeah. Oh, we'll get into a whole other subject on some interesting things with that. But I want to wrap up with some feel good news because I know you will love this story. Devoted dog waits at train station every day for 12 hours so he can excitedly greet his owner.
What? Where?
This is in China. The dog's name is Bear. I don't want to butcher it by trying to say it in Chinese, but the owner has to take the train. And so this 15-year-old dog will saunter down to the station every morning, plop down on the pavement, and wait for 12 hours for his owner to come home. He occasionally interacts with other people, but saves all of his 15-year-old dog energy for when his parent gets off the train. And he's been doing this for years. Waits for him every day.
How does that even work? That is so cute, but how does that even work? I would be so scared. What if somebody takes my old dog? What if my old dog misses me and doesn't have a water bowl?
Well,
is there a couch at this station?
So we're saying that your dog is not going to be able to do this, but for this man in China, it's working out well.
Well, good for them. I like that.
As we wrap up, we want to, again, ask you to subscribe and rate the podcast. Keep in touch. I'm Shut Up Skippy on Instagram. We also have the H Humanitarians Podcast on Instagram as well. And Deanna, you can be found. The name's
Hilarious Humanitarian on Instagram. Or if you want to check out my parent humor Instagram, it's Humanitarian Mom. I don't know if I've ever even talked about that.
I don't think you have. I like that one.
There you go.
All right. And thank you for listening. And we will be back next week with another podcast. Bye.
Bye, guys.